Do you believe, given his Alzheimer's status, that Mr. Hackman was able to live on his own and survive for those 7 days?
I'm not aware of what his normal daily functioning capability was. He was in a very poor state of health. He had significant heart disease, and I think ultimately that is what resulted in his death.
What about starvation?
There was no food in his stomach, which means he had not eaten recently, but he had also no evidence of dehydration.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Now, the investigation into legendary Hollywood actor Gene Hackman's death isn't over. New Mexico cops feel there are still a few loopholes they want clarity on. Cell phone records are a major proponent of unknowns that need to be addressed, and these are still outstanding. Interestingly, there are cell phone records for Betsy and computer activity involving emails, but absolutely none for Hackman. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, thank you very much to the many of you who have subscribed. For those following the Ramsey case, we are doing some members-only videos. There's already one posted there, over 20 minutes long, so you can check that out. It's also available on Patreon. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, according to The Sun, quote, investigators are awaiting cell phone records from the couple's phones, though it is very unlikely they will bring anything new to light that authorities do not already know. That's according to the sheriff. The sheriff added that there's no evidence that Hackman communicated with anyone in the week before his death. And I think this sheds light on the quality of life Hackman was living. This is indicative of just how advanced Hackman's Alzheimer's was. If you think about it, if you are not on your phone or a computer at all for days and weeks on end, if there's an emergency in your home and you're incapable of calling 911, how alive, how much cognitive function do you actually have? Let's go back to the article. I don't know if he used cell phones or technology or emails. There's no indication of that, he told reporters. Now, I can tell you as a writer, as long as I live, I will probably write until I can't write anymore. And we know that Hackman was an artist. We also know that he wrote fiction books and Betsy edited them. Well, if he wasn't writing, if he wasn't able to do that, it probably means his functionality was extremely restricted. And so they say, right now, there's no activity from Mr. Hackman. And so if you think about it, could Hackman, it's a legitimate question, could he feed himself if he was unable to feed Zinner? That is another loophole that needs to be definitively addressed, that poor dog's cause of death. I mean, it's possible that she had an infection from her surgery, this is the dog, following the visit to the vet, but I think out of all the possibilities, this is an outlier. Now, I want you to imagine this scenario. Betsy and Zinner's inside a crate. They arrive home from running errands. We're going to go through those errands in a moment. Betsy's carrying Zinner inside, likely with Zinner still inside the crate. Think about, wouldn't that likely take a physical toll on Betsy? I mean, literally, once she placed the crate on the floor, panting out of breath from the exertion, isn't that when this virus really kicked in? When she was really struggling to breathe, when Betsy's life and death battle likely began. And dying because you can't breathe has got to be one of the worst ways to exit this life. But then you have Hackman. He's somewhere in the house, and in whatever state of cognitive impairment he was in, even though Betsy is deceased, he's unable to respond. If you think about it, if he was able to respond, he could have called 911, maybe they could have saved her. But it's not just that he can't respond that day, right, which was February 11th, or that night, or the next morning, or the next afternoon. This goes on for a week. He is in the house with her. She's expired, and he's unable to process that fact, seemingly, or call 911, or alert a neighbor. If he can't do that, how is he able to feed himself? It's also interesting when Hackman's kids made their joint press statement, did they mention Alzheimer's at all? You'd think that would be a very pertinent bit of information, and that medical knowledge strongly militates against an intruder type scenario or foul play. Think about it. If you don't know about the Alzheimer's, then you might say, well, this doesn't really make a lot of sense, but an intruder suddenly ties everything together because you don't have the answers. But when you have that answer, and you know it's not just Alzheimer's but advanced Alzheimer's, well then suddenly it does look like natural causes, doesn't it? And that just shows you when you've got information missing, are you able to see into the reality given all the other information that's there, right? For example, the dog in the crate, for example, the fact that even if you didn't know that he had Alzheimer's, the fact that he's 95, you probably would assume it. And given the fact that there's a medical sort of backstory to this, the fact that where Betsy is lying, well, right there, contextually, is a bottle of pills that is open and the pills are lying scattered on the counter. I mean, that is giving you right up to the minute context that there's a health issue going on. So can you see there are some interesting analogies to this case and to the Ramsey case? And in both of these cases, in terms of Betsy and Jean, what you have are pre-existing conditions which place both of these individuals, and as it turns out, one of the dogs as well, at real risk. Both of them are vulnerable to a situation because of health issues. And in both cases, they're pre-existing. Betsy's got a pre-existing situation where she probably had an infection for 3 to 6 days. Jean's is obviously a lot worse, but the dog also had surgery. I also want to say, statistically speaking, I think the Hunter virus diagnosis is possibly more statistically rare than a gas leak in New Mexico. I'm saying possibly, I don't know that for a fact, but I would imagine if only 1 or 2 Americans die every year, I mean, far more Americans die from gas leaks. Well, if that doesn't make you think, it should, and we do need to deal with that, and that's the loophole I want to address. I don't know if the cops are dealing with that. In any event, let's deal with what we do know. Investigators retrieved communications from Betsy, who was a concert pianist detailing her final days. They found that she picked up Zinner from Gruder Veterinary Hospital on February 9th and had spoken with a massage therapist via email around 11:20 the morning of the day that she died. Moving on to the afternoon, Miss Arakawa was at the Sprouts Farmers Market between 3:30 and 4:15 p.m. About 5 minutes later, CCTV footage captured her at the local CVS pharmacy. So Betsy had quite a busy day for a 60-something and quite a strenuous day for a 60-something with an infection. By the end of the day, there was one errand remaining, lugging that crate into the house, possibly with a dog inside it. It's a big house and a big dog, and it had been a long day. It was at this point that the virus reached its critical peak. Other emails were left unopened on February 11, and the sheriff said there was no additional outgoing communication from her or known activity after February 11. Unfortunately, they don't provide a timestamp, but the last activity, the last proof of life, is likely the CCTV sighting at just after 5 p.m. This suggests Betsy may have died moments after arriving home on the 11th and possibly prior to her being able to use the medication she'd specifically obtained, probably for herself. Now, the sheriff said that the information that may be gathered from Betsy's cell phone could indicate when she started feeling unwell, which may have been roughly 3 to 6 days before she died. The medical examiner said the actor's wife would have succumbed pretty quickly once fluid began to build up in her lungs. Wasn't she aware that this was taking place? And so Mendoza said, I think the cell phones may have some indications of that prior to the 11th. And so the question arises, did Betsy tell anyone she wasn't feeling great? I do think the Alzheimer's thing clears up a lot. The family may have left it out, but that's likely the reason they didn't email or call Hackman. Would he know who called if they called? If you know anyone with Alzheimer's, you know it's a disease that is very disturbing in a number of ways. It's very depressing as well. In a real sense, a person is no longer there for some time, even while they are still alive. The lights are on type of thing, but nobody's home. So why didn't Hackman's family call? Well, I think we know why now. But then the question is, what about Arakawa's family? Were they being supportive? Were they calling her? Were they reaching out? Now that Betsy's family are due to inherit, there is likely to be lots of communication, which brings us to the topic for our next analysis. Jean's millions up for grabs thanks to a curious kink in New Mexico law, and we'll be dealing with that in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.